Hello and welcome to your Velvet Ashes Legacy podcast. Denise Beck here with Sarah Hilkeman. Hello, Sarah.
Hey, Denise.
How are you today?
Oh, I am good. It is so cold where I'm living.
Oh my goodness. Me too, me too. And yet there were many times in my life that I would long for these negative
Oh, I
degree temperatures.
know. Yes. Yeah. I missed it so much living in the tropics.
Right. So wherever you are today, what temperature you're feeling, I'm sure there's moments of gratefulness and moments of, oh, I long for the exact opposite of what I'm feeling right now.
Right.
Um, This month, Velvet Ashes is introducing our new theme, and our theme for this month is Pilgrim. Talk a little bit about what we're getting into this month with our theme for Velvet Ashes.
Denise, I don't know about where you lived, but one thing as I was reflecting about this theme was when I would be out, usually with my teammate walking, whether it was heading to the market or going for a prayer walk, or my teammate and I would spend a lot of time just like walking around and seeing if there was someone that the Lord sort of led us to talk to. But there's always this question of people, like, as you walked by them, they would just kind of ask, where are you going? And in some ways, it was almost rhetorical of, kind of that like, how are you sort of greeting, but it was just familiar and we come from maybe more of an independent culture for our home culture where there's maybe that like, well, it's none of your business where I'm going,
Right.
But just that question can really resonate and be something that even as we think about our lives and our cross-cultural journeys and our journey with the Lord, where are you going? Like reflecting on that journey. And sometimes it can be fuzzy and, like, I don't know where the end point of this journey is, or I don't even know how to name this stop on the journey or this season of the journey. And so we know what it's like to follow God into this kind of unknown. And so that's really what this month, this theme of Pilgrim is all about, is sort of like looking at our lives as a journey. And what does it look like to be people on a journey with purpose and presence and looking at how God is working?
Even that, the question you said is people asked, where are you going? And I think even before we got to the field, people are like, why are you going?
Yeah.
And those are two questions that you have to wrestle with and answer because it doesn't make sense to some people, right? And I feel like that's what pilgrimage is. It's not about, tourism. It's not, I'm going here to enjoy and see and to have ease and, fun. Pilgrimage isn't about that, right? So that's a little bit of the difference between pilgrimage and vacation, right?
Well, and you brought up this interesting concept, Denise. Do you want to talk about this? The friction maxing?
I had never heard of this term before, and I got some article in my inbox, and it had this term called friction maxing. And it's this idea of not doing things the easy way, that inconvenience actually builds something in us that we need. We need to be inconvenienced. And yet so many of the things in our society and our world are geared at reducing inconvenience. So I don't know about you, but I noticed it when I would be in my host culture and see things that were done in a really, not convenient way, but not the most productive way. Like I could see other things like this could be so much better. This would get done easier. This would be less problems. And I'm wrestling in my mind about why would you do it this way? It's so inconvenient, because I was wired like that. And then, learning that I'm not here to help them solve their convenience problem. Right. And so I had to fight against that and realize that there were certain things that grew in me that slowness and inconvenience helped contribute to, that I needed. And so apparently there's this trend now called friction maxing, which is like do things to inconvenience yourself, to grow something in you that you need. And I feel like that's also pilgrimage, right? It's not about the destination as far as like, I just want to get there. If we just wanted to
Hmm.
get there, we would hop on a plane or a train. It's about
Right.
how am I going to be changed in the process of getting to this place.
Hmm.
And I feel like when I read this, I was like, oh my gosh, global workers get this, right? And it's
Hmm.
something that's hard to explain to other people. It's like, it's about the process. It's about how do I help change people and introduce them to something that isn't about the easiest and the most convenient, but it's about how changed we are in that.
Well, and just that leaning into that like resistance or the cost of it. I was just thinking about the process of learning a language.
Yes.
And so I was recently I have a big birthday this year and
Yes.
was thinking about like, okay, I want to do kind of like some really intentional things. And so I was just like Googling, bucket list for a certain decade. And one of them was, they were all just like these big, like go on a trip or learn a new language. And I was thinking, learning a new language is not just like a bucket list thing that you check off. Like, leaning into how hard it is and how like we want it to just be, oh, I get this language, I know these things, and at least for me I was not good at it.
Hmm. Hmm.
And it takes so much work and brain power and this long process of being willing to like just keep showing up and keep practicing and forgetting words and keep trying and keep fumbling in conversation. And yeah, but
Yes.
then
A
like,
willingness to be humiliated.
yes, for sure.
Yes.
Um, but like thinking about even learning a language as a journey of,
Yeah.
like, unless you're incredibly good, it's going to be a process that you continue on for a
Yeah.
very long time.
And what would it change in our lives as we look at Pilgrim as our theme to get to the end of the day and to look at all of the areas of tension and inconvenience and not be frustrated by it, but look at it as, man, I got some edges really softened today. I got some
Hmm.
hard places really rubbed off today, and it's like looking at it as a good thing about the Lord shaping you because that's what
Hmm.
pilgrimage is, right? We want to be shaped and smoothed and our rough edges rubbed off and be look more like him on the other side of this journey. So
Hmm.
I get really excited about thinking, where's the Lord going to take us this month as we lean into pilgrimage and meditate on that and invite him to change us because of what we're going to
Hmm.
learn about that. Sarah, we're actually going to do this for real. We've got plans.
Yes, yeah. So it's such an interesting concept to be even like telling people about. Like, how do you explain I'm gonna do a long walk?
We're going to walk
um,
for a long time. Yes.
right. But yeah, it's for, I don't know, centuries. It's been something that people do as like a spiritual discipline, as a way to like work things out with the Lord, because when we
Mhm.
walk, like it does something in our brain and it like opens up space to process, and it does something in our body and it does something in our spirit. And so yeah, we as a Velvet Ashes team are going to do a pilgrimage later this year. And it's one of those things, like, you don't just jump in and say, all right, I'm going to walk 15 miles a day and be ready
Right.
to go. Like, there's a process to prepare for it. And it feels like one of those things that's like softening the rough edges, because I want to just do it. Like, I want to just be ready. And the hard work of preparing
Yeah.
is challenging me mentally as well as physically.
Right. There's the physical preparation and then the mental preparation. It's kind of like when you go, I was talking to somebody last night who is going to be traveling a little bit because I was mentioning about our retreat in Italy. And they were like, well, I really want to study up on the places that I'm going so that I'm better appreciate it. And I feel like that's where
Mm,
I'm at. Is like, I want to understand what's going to be hard about this. What can I look for? What can I be encouraged to push through? Where can I look for the Lord to meet me so I can appreciate the act of the walk, the pilgrimage, the Camino
mhm.
more than just oh, I did that, oh, I didn't know I should be looking for that. Oh, I didn't know, like I want to do my work on the front end to appreciate and look for the most change throughout the process of that um, as well. But yeah, so I am really excited about what this preparation and planning process will do for us as a team. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, just there's so many even women cross culturally. This last week, a global worker friend of mine walked the Camino with a friend and just like getting to hear
Okay.
about their process with that. And so I'm excited to do this with you and Danielle and
Yes, me
see what
too.
the Lord has for us there. So, um, so many wonderful things happening this month in Velvet Ashes. One of those things that I want to just point out is we've launched this new membership model. And I don't even love the word membership, but there's elements of that word that are a protection for our
Mm-hmm.
community. And so that's really what it is. And there's levels where you can join us for free. The app is the key. The app opens up doors for you. There's a free level, there's a circle level, there's an inner circle level, and all that has to do is not with clicks, it is with the amount of engagement you are invited into with our community and the amount of, hey, I want this with Velvet
Mm-hmm.
Ashes that you have. And so we just encourage you, have a look and be invited into everything that the membership has for you and the communities that are waiting for you there.
Mm-hmm. And that, to me, that's the key of it, is
Yeah.
really coming back to what is the heart of Velvet Ashes from the very beginning, and that is linking arms with other sisters who understand cross-cultural life and
Yes.
the sacrifices and the journey,
Yes.
the friction, the ways that our rough edges are specifically smoothed by this particular
Mhm.
life. And really linking arms and saying, we're in this together. Like,
Yeah.
let's ask each other questions about everything from the really hard to the super practical, and everything in between. And let's encourage each other. Let's pray
Mhm.
for one another. Let's talk about um, topics like the idea of pilgrim, and like be in this together.
Yeah. Well, and honestly, Sarah, when Velvet Ashes started, some of this could happen on Facebook, some of this could happen on Instagram, but progressively, those places have not become places where we can continue that type of a conversation for security reasons, number one, for I can't find my friends anymore because it's all influencers and ads, and it's not just an easy place like I have 5 minutes and I want to get on and get in a conversation, but I got to scroll for 20 minutes to even find where those
Mm,
conversations are happening. And so this is a place for that. And we wanted to invite women back into that. And so examples
mm-hmm,
of some conversations that are happening over there, even just this last week, it's like, hey, I'm getting married on the field and there's complications with merging two sending orgs. How do we do that well? Anybody have advice to, hey, what apps are you using? And what would you be doing if you could do anything? And, just like
mm-hmm.
real conversations that are happening. So we invite you at any level to jump in with your community and use Velvet Ashes as a platform to find your people, to find your conversations, and to just feel like you belong. So
Yeah.
excited to offer that for you. But another place that we like to invite you into deeper conversations is through this podcast. And Sarah, would you invite people into what that conversation is this month?
We have a fantastic legacy story for you. I got to talk to Jeff Barker, who was a professor at the college that I went to, and he has done a really deep dive into the life of Arlene Schuiteman. One of the things I love about her and her story is that she was a Midwest farm girl.
Mm,
Uh, I resonate with that. And yet she just kept saying yes to what the Lord had for her. And that took her to the Sudan and Ethiopia and Zambia as a nurse. And then back to a small town in the Midwest,
mm,
for the end of her life. And I, Yeah, I'm so grateful. One of the things we talk about with the legacy stories is that it's so important to have places and ways to tell stories. And so I'm really grateful that Jeff has done that in writing a play about Arlene's life and books about her life. And so, yeah, I'm so excited for this conversation to get to share it with our community.
I am too. I can't wait to listen with you all. Thanks so much for tuning in to this episode of the Velvet Ashes Legacy podcast, and enjoy all that we have for you this month. Thanks again to Barnabas International for making all of this possible. We are so grateful that they care about women who serve cross-culturally. All right, stay tuned for the legacy story on your Velvet Ashes Legacy podcast.
Every voice part of the symphony.
Jeff, thank you so much for joining me to tell Arlene's story.
You're so welcome. I'm really thrilled to be here.
Well, I was just telling you before we hopped on, so I attended Northwestern College when you were teaching there and working there, and I first got a glimpse of Arlene's story shared through the performance called Sioux Center Sudan, put on by the Drama Ministries Ensemble. And I remember that night after seeing it, I went back to my dorm room, and I remember saying specifically to my roommate, I think God is calling me to serve cross-culturally. And it was not the only thing in that, in God's call and that journey. It was a journey, as we will see Arlene had as well. But just seeing her story portrayed in that way was really impactful to me.
I'm so thrilled to hear that.
Yeah. And I don't know how God's going to use Arlene's story in the lives of our listeners, but I know it's already impacted many. All those people who've gotten to learn about her story through you and your work. So yeah, I'm excited to dive in. As we get started, Jeff, how did you first hear about Arlene? And kind of what drew you to her story?
That's such a great question. I was interested in writing a story about a woman in ministry, particularly a play, for my students to perform at Northwestern. And there's a longer story about how Arlene's name became mentioned. I was pursuing a woman named Betty Green, who was a missionary airplane pilot. And Arlene came to see a play called Sky Girls that my wife had directed. And she tapped Karen on the shoulder at intermission and said, I knew a Sky Girl. Her name was Betty Green. Well, after the play, Karen was going to ask Arlene about Betty Green, but Arlene disappeared. She went home without further conversation. Well, I went to my students the next Monday and said, Karen met someone who knew Betty Green, and we don't know who this person is. And one of my students said, oh, she goes to my church. Her name is Arlene Schuiteman. You should meet her. She will change your life. And I said, all right, then I want to meet her. And I called her up and I said, I'd like to come and talk to you about Betty Green. I had a conversation with her. Betty Green used to fly Arlene around on the African continent.
Oh, wow.
And then at the end of that conversation, I said, Arlene, may I come back and talk with you again? And I came back and I began to ask Arlene about her story. And I finally said, Arlene, I don't think I'm supposed to write about Betty Green. I think I'm supposed to write about you. And I wonder if you'll let me write a play about your journey. She said, why do you want to do that? And I said, well, to edify the church and to celebrate the gospel. And she said, those are good answers. And she said, I will let you do that on one condition. I said, what's that? She said, that you will never put a missionary on a pedestal.
Mm.
Because if you do, I'll take the story away from you just like that. And I said, all right, I agree to those conditions. This needs to be the story of God at work in the world. And then we began. That was 2005. Arlene shared her story just in interview form. And I wrote the play that you saw, Sarah,
Mm-hmm.
and we performed that play for 2 or 3 years. We took it to Japan. We took it around the United States. And Arlene even traveled with us
Oh, really?
in the van to share that story. She was in her 80s at that time. And I thought that would be the end of our journey together, just those few years. And then Arlene shared with me that she had journals. I didn't even know that she had kept
Oh, wow.
journals at that point. And she began. My point is, this is a long journey of Arlene coming to trust me,
Mm-hmm.
to trust that this was in God's hands, that our relationship would develop appropriately. And then she began sharing her journals. She eventually gave me all of her journals, and she asked me when I was finished with them to turn them over to an archive, which I now have done with her. All of her Africa journals and letters are now at Hope College in their archives.
Okay.
Anyway, that
Wow.
was the beginning of our journey together.
I love that on so many levels. Just not all cross-cultural workers, not all missionaries have the opportunity to be able to share their story in that way. And so what a gift, I'm sure, for Arlene herself, to be able to pass along her story. And I also just love the connection of God's kingdom. So we actually have highlighted Betty Green on our podcast and shared her
wonderful.
story.
Yeah.
And so I just love that they have that connection. And God's kingdom is small in some ways of the ways that he weaves our stories together and grand. Yeah.
I'll tell you another little tidbit, Sarah. We did a preview of the play. Our very first performance of the play was at Northwestern College, and this is before our first tour. And the place was full, and I thought, where have all these people come from? I had no idea how many people in Northwest Iowa knew Arlene.
Okay.
And so Arlene was greeting people and thanking them for coming, and they all left. And then Arlene was talking to my students and praying for them before they went away on their first tour. And I was picking up the props and just kind of overhearing this conversation. And Arlene was saying to the students, I never would have trusted anyone with this story except Jeff. And I thought, what? And I came to realize just over later conversations that Arlene had her eye on me over a period of years. She was attending plays at Northwestern. She was watching my work. She was listening. She was saying, God, who is going to carry my story forward? Who do you appoint to do that? And God, I feel now that God was appointing me, that I was responding to his call in my life. But I didn't understand until much later that it was an answer to Arlene's prayer as well.
Wow. The Lord is so good. Let's dig into more of Arlene's story. Can you tell us a little bit, Jeff, what she was like as a kid? What do you know about her childhood? Maybe a little bit of her faith story. What was her, the start of her life?
Sure. Arlene grew up in Northwest Iowa. She grew up on a farm. So she's a farm girl, one of 6 daughters. And she loved her mother and father, Pa and Ma, she always called them. And when she was a little girl, she would she was always known for taking care of people, for taking out her father's slivers, and she was around the animals, and she was not nervous about things of the body and things of the farm and the animals, and so she kind of thought that she might become a nurse someday. But she was immediately drawn into teaching life, and so it was a context in which there was great love in the family, great faithfulness to the church, and I would say she had a fairly typical childhood in terms of growing up in a house that was committed to the scripture, would read from the scripture every day at every meal when the family gathered, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. When they were all there, they would read from the scripture, and then they would go to church, I think twice on Sunday, morning and afternoon at that time. Mm-hmm. And then Arlene, as she grew up, she was a revered leader in the church. She was a president of Christian Endeavor, kind of youth group organization. And she really, I understand, of course I wasn't there, but I understand that she was a person of joy, that she was kind of the life of the party, that she loved to be playful. But of course, she's a part of Dutch culture, and so very somewhat stern culture and very disciplined culture and very intentional culture. Her call her call to her life beyond the farm began with teaching. She taught for, I believe it was 8 years in grade schools in Northwest Iowa, and was a much beloved teacher. But she also went with her mom and sisters to the annual missionary convention, which was held in Orange City. And a missionary gave a sermon in which he said, he was from Arabia, and he said, "We need nurses." And she felt a kind of tug in her heart that she should respond. But she already had a contract for the next year to teach, and she, of course, didn't have a nursing degree. And so she kind of put that in the back and went on teaching. And then came this special day at her home church when her pastor was preaching from Isaiah 6, which, of course, has the great line, "Here am I, send me." And the pastor read that line. And if you will let me read a little bit of this story from the Sioux Center Sudan book. That day, Reverend DeYoung preached from the prophecy of Isaiah chapter 6. King Uzziah was dead, so change was in the wind for the people of Judah. Isaiah had a vision, a flight of angels with 6 wings. The angels sang, "The whole earth is full of God's glory." The buildings shook. A fiery altar spilled smoke everywhere. Isaiah was terrified. The voice of the Lord was heard to say, "Whom shall I send? And who will go for us?" And looking up from his Bible, Reverend DeYoung repeated the question to his own congregation, "Who will we send?" He meant it not as a rhetorical question, but as an actual question. His church was an evangelical church that supported missionaries around the world. They believed that the gospel story was indeed good news, and that when Jesus told his followers to carry his story to the ends of the earth, he meant everywhere. Arlene's home church took their assignment seriously. Who will we send? Who will go for us? What happened next was a supernatural event for which Arlene has no proof or witnesses, but to her it was real. With her pastor's words echoing in her ears, Arlene glanced down at her arms, and then at her hands, her legs, her feet. She looked, she stared, she was glowing. She felt hot, heat coursing through her body. Astounded, she looked around, expecting everyone to be glowing, but no one else was. She was the only one glowing. Now she was embarrassed because she was about to attract considerable attention and distress to someone of her personality. She started to slump down, trying to disappear. She glanced around again, but no one was looking at her. One boy was sleeping. No one had noticed. Only she could tell that this was happening. This was just for her, only her. The sensation did not subside quickly. It persisted many minutes. A connection surged from testament to testament, Isaiah 6 to Acts 2, then from Pentecost's upper room to that Sioux Center church gallery on a wintry Sunday afternoon, a non-consuming fire, the Holy Spirit of God. She sat up and whispered, "Here am I, send me." Arlene went to her pastor's study that week and told him the story. And he asked her, "What do you think it means?" And she said, "I think it means that God wants to send me." And that was the beginning of her missionary call and her missionary journey. And Arlene said to me, Sarah, she said, as I met missionaries over the years, it seems that so many of them had a kind of supernatural experience like that. It seemed to be important to affirm their call when they were facing tough times on the mission field. They would have that particular memory to encourage them.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what came to mind as you were sharing that particular experience. Like, what a gift for her to have, like, oh, this was just for me. Like, this was this powerful encounter with the Lord and this special encounter with the Lord. One, to make it clear that this is what God is calling, but also, like you said, when you get to those times of doubt, like, what in the world am I doing? To go back to that memory of, oh, this was God so obviously saying, this is what he has. I can trust that he's going to keep working, even though it feels really confusing and hard. And so, yeah, what a precious thing for her. And I just, I resonate. I'm also a Midwest farm girl. And so just love that part of her story, not Dutch specifically, but love that she had that background. But let's jump into now. She's had this really powerful encounter. She knows that this is God calling her. What did that look like as far as, did she know where she was going to go? How did she get actually to the field?
Well, the pastor said, why don't you write a letter to this woman? And he gave her an address. And so she wrote to the RCA headquarters and said, I think I'm called to missions. And this particular woman wrote back. She said, well, you need to go to nursing school and then write back to me. Well, Arlene was a little discouraged because she didn't get an immediate yes, but she told her parents, I think I should go to nursing school. And they went, what do you mean? You've already got a teaching job. And she said, no, I think I should go to nursing school. She did not tell them about her call to missions at that time, but she went to nursing school in Sioux City. And, in story structure, there's a thing called a threshold guardian. There's somebody that kind of stands in the way to say, are you sure you want to go down this path? Well, when she finished, as she was finishing nursing school, one of the administrators came to her and said, Arlene, we love you here. We love what you've accomplished. We want you to teach for us. Would you go on and get a degree at the University of Iowa? We will pay for it. And then you come back and teach for us. And Arlene, that was the threshold guardian for her, saying, no, don't go to the mission field. But Arlene, after all those years, still hung on to her call. Yeah. And she said, no, I have something else that I need to do first. And so she wrote back to the RCA, and they said, would you come out for an interview? And she came out, And then they put her on a plane to fly home. They wanted her to have the experience of her first plane flight. I've often wondered if she was the first woman of Northwest Iowa to fly in an airplane. But she flew home, and she had affirmation from the Reformed Church in America that she would go to the mission field. They needed a nurse immediately.
Okay.
On the riverbank in Nasser in the South Sudan. And so she sort of bypassed the usual process. She had to do cultural work and language work once she arrived, and that's kind of slowed down her medical work. But she was plunged in right away, and in 1955, that arrived on the riverbank at the hospital, the place of magic, it was called by the locals. And there she was, the sole nurse at that time at that hospital. There were hundreds of people that would show up to the clinic every day. And Arlene had to set up a system, an intake system. She had to set up helpers for her and train them, and was plunged into medical missions, and of course interacting with the other missionaries there.
Okay, so she did have a team of others that were there, of other foreigners.
There were, of course, there were other missionaries, a few other missionaries. This was a hospital, a medical station that had been founded some decades earlier, and there was a wonderful linguist by the name of Eleanor Vandevort who wrote a marvelous book called A Leopard Tamed. She became a lifelong friend, best friend of Arlene's, and then Marion was a school teacher, and Marion did work she basically was educating women, when in that culture women were not invited into the education system. But Marion went to work on that task and made wonderful progress. And Arlene was working on the medical front.
Okay.
Eleanor Vandevort working on the translating the Bible front.
Well, goodness, I'm sure there are so many stories and details that we could get into of what Arlene's life was like on the field. But can you give us some kind of highlights about what her life was like on the field and what some of her work looked like?
Oh, sure. I'll share another little piece of Sioux Center, Sudan. This book. This is a story of a little boy. Jock is his name, and this little boy had a terrible experience with a cow. The cattle in South Sudan are so very important. That morning, 40 miles away from the hospital, a 7-year-old Nuer boy was walking in the family khal. He was perfectly used to being among cows, so he knew how to watch out for the horns, but suddenly something terrible happened. Which cow did the deed? Later, anyone in the boy's family, including the boy himself, could tell you the cow's name. Not that the cow was to blame for what happened, neither was the boy. It simply happened. A longhorned cow flicked its head, perhaps to shake off flies. The pointed end of a horn sliced the boy's abdomen. His intestines spilled out, and he shouted as he fell into the dung. Nuer homes usually contained a few versatile tools. There were cooking pots, gourds, and spoons. There were spears, a hoe, and fishhooks. A fishhook would come in handy to sew up the boy's wound, but the family had no fishing line. The father ran to a cow and grabbed hold of its long tail, cutting off a few sturdy hairs with his teeth. He dashed back to his wife's tuckle, took the fishhook from her trembling hand. He threaded the hook. Jock's mother held back the skin while the father gently pushed the intestines under the flap of skin and then pulled the skin together. He pinched the skin and pushed the hook through the 2 layers, pulling the cow's hair tight. When the final stitch was tied off, Jock's mother and father gathered a few cloths to cover themselves when the rain grew coldest, and they headed toward the river. Laying Jock in the bottom of a borrowed dugout canoe, the father paddled out into the deepest water, and although it was still midday, they knew they would have to paddle through the night. That's the beginning of that story, and the rest of that story in the book tells us how the boy arrived at the mission station and the doctor was gone. And Arlene was the only medical person there. She had to get out a book and look up how to deal with this surgery. So she's following the book and opening up this wound and saving this boy's life. And I have pictures of that smiling boy as he survived that terrible event and that surgery. And I don't know if he's still alive today. I haven't followed up on that. Mm-hmm. But that was the kind of circumstance that Arlene was thrown into. She worked with surgeries, especially surgeries on the eyes. There was a particular blindness, a danger to the eyes that would develop because of infections of the eyes in that culture. And Arlene and the doctor were a part of restoring vision to so many people. And there was a little church there. She was part of that church, and they had a New Air pastor. That's the tribe that was based there. And the people that Arlene was friends with and worked closely with. But there were just a few Christians. And Arlene was part of leading an old man named Ewall to the Lord. And Ewall became a passionate Christian. Mm. They would say in his later years, all he wanted to talk about was Jesus. He would say, if you don't want to talk about Jesus, go away. I have no other talk. And that man, he became a symbol of the only convert, the only person who came to Christ while Arlene and Vandy and Marion were there. And it was many, many years later that after Arlene had been thrown out of that country because of the change in the government, she was removed, and she and Vandy and Marion felt as if there were some ways in terms of the gospel that they had been failures. Mm. But it was many, many years later that Arlene met some relatives of Ewall in the United States, and several of them had become pastors. They were able to tell how the story of Christ had been carried forward after these missionaries were gone. And I was able to witness some of that firsthand, Sarah. I was in Sioux Center, Iowa, the night that the play was performed in Arlene's home church for the first time. This was 2006, so 20 years ago. And the place was full, maybe 1,000 people there that night. Wow. And there were 50 New Air people, or people, I think some people had also come who had Ethiopian background. And these people had come from across the country, as far away as Georgia, because they had heard that Arlene and Vandy were going to be there that night. Eleanor Vandevort had come from Pennsylvania. And after the play, the pastor said, "We have some African friends here tonight. I wonder if anyone would like to say anything." And one gentleman stood up and he said, "I want you all to think of the most famous person that you can think of, and what a thrill it would be for you to meet that person." He said, "That's how we feel here tonight, meeting Eleanor and Arlene, because they came to us. We are Christians today. It is such a thrill for us to meet them here tonight." That was a very, very special night for all of us.
Yeah, I think we don't so often, we might not feel like we've failed, like you said, maybe Arlene and these other ladies did, but we might not see the fruit right away of the work that we are doing, whether it's on the mission field or just in our lives. And
Yes.
yet, what a sweet gift to see, so many years later, God is at work. And sometimes we get to see it and sometimes we don't, but we can trust that he is working. And goodness, yeah, I love that those people got to come and for them to see like, oh, this is how the gospel came to us, or to our people, and for Arlene and Randy to see that how God has worked. So
Arlene's doorway into the mission field was through medical missions. She saw many medical needs. I've already mentioned some of those. One of the medical needs that she saw was infant mortality, and she began to do careful analysis of what was going on and discovered that she simply needed to provide formula for the children, provide powdered milk, and to teach some of the people how to boil the water, to provide public health, personal hygiene, to guard those infants. And she was able to, in her time in the South Sudan, to see the infant mortality rate change.
wow.
And I was with Arlene. We went to Omaha once when the book was released, and we took some books down to a church in Omaha. And a gentleman came up to Arlene and he said, I just wanted to meet you. I was one of the babies whose life you saved when you came to my country. So we witnessed, you don't really get to see those dots connected always, but we were able to see that. So Arlene's primary or doorway into ministry was through medical missions. I asked her once if she saw herself as an evangelist, and she said, Jeff, I was not the primary evangelist. I saw myself as a person who went with the evangelists and prayed for them. I led Bible studies. I was a support to the evangelists was my task. And she took that very, very seriously. Her life of prayer, all her life to the very end, was a rich, serious, intentional life. She took that work in the spirit world very, very seriously.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned that she was kicked out of the Sudan. Did she stay in Africa? What other kinds of things did she do?
No, she came back to the United States. At that time, missionaries would go away for 5 years at a time. And she said, Jeff, I knew when I left, I might be 5 years without ever hearing my mother's voice. Because, of course, they did not have cell phones, didn't have telephones there in the village. And so she needed to come home. She needed a rest. And she went to the University of Iowa and studied public health and got a degree in public health. And then she was looking, there were several mission organizations that were eager to have Arlene join them. But then she got a call to Ethiopia to come and to start a nursing school in the far western mountains of Ethiopia. And she, through a series of conversations in prayer, felt that was her next calling. And so she responded in 1966 to go to Ethiopia. She was there until, I believe it was 1977. There was just as there had been governmental struggles in the South Sudan, there were governmental struggles in Ethiopia. The king of the country was killed, and socialist, communist organizations took over. There was a military coup, and eventually then Arlene she had been teaching nursing and actually nursing at the hospital. And she was it's a longer story that's told in the second book, Iowa, Ethiopia. there was a great revival in the western mountains of Ethiopia, and that brought about a revival in Arlene's own life.
Oh,
It was
wow.
during that time that she experienced a great movement of the Spirit, and both in her church and personally. And so that's a longer, rich story. But Arlene got taken away by the government, moved into the capital city, and she taught nursing for just 1 year and then was sent out of the country. And
Okay.
so she came back to the United States, wondering what would be her next calling, and then eventually got a very specific call to Zambia. Again, she was eventually was a nursing instructor, and she rose to a position of great leadership in the country of Zambia. She was part of the General Nursing Council and helped set standards for that country. And she was there in Zambia from 78 to 1989. And
Okay.
that, you may recall, Sarah, was the time when AIDS came to Africa.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a mysterious disease. They didn't understand. It didn't have the name AIDS at that time, but this mysterious, dangerous disease that threatened to kill so many people and did kill so many people
Mm-hmm.
on the African continent. And Arlene was there at the beginning of that. She lost one of her own friends to that disease. So those 12 years then ended her career in Africa. She retired from there and
Okay.
then returned back to Sioux Center, Iowa. By then, her father had already passed away. Her mother had passed away after living with her sister in Sioux Center. And then Arlene moved into her mother's old home and stayed there for some years as
Okay.
part of her home church.
Mm-hmm.
She was part of many boards. I remember the day I walked into the Sioux Center Library, and I was just glancing at the, institutions
Mm-hmm.
like that have donor boards, and I looked at the donor board and I saw Arlene's name was there. So she was just a great part of the support of that community, and of course a big part of the church. She was on several
Mm-hmm.
committees at the church and other organizations that she worked for there in the town. She would say to me after I wrote 4 books about her life on the mission field, she would say, "Jeff, you haven't begun to write anything about my time after Africa." And I said, "Well, Arlene, we'll see." So that story is yet to be told.
Did she ever get married?
No, she did not ever get married. She wanted to be married. She wanted to be a farmer's wife as a child. And she did have a boyfriend on the farm. He's the first man that asked her, I was interested in marriage.
Mm-hmm.
And through a series of events, she felt that she should break off that relationship. And then there was a man in Africa who asked her to marry him, and she very, very seriously considered that. Arlene was a woman that when there was a question asked, she would pray about it long, and she would get counsel, and so she asked the question, "Lord, is this from you?" And
Mm-hmm.
and she eventually decided no, but she wanted to have children. She loved life on the farm. So even though to the very end she affirmed that she had said yes she had discerned what the Lord was asking of her, and she said yes to the Lord, it cost her because it
Mm-hmm.
was not what she was expecting and what she was longing for. Even in her 50s, I found in her journals and her letters and in conversations with her, she was lonely. She
Mm.
would love to have been married and
Yeah.
had a life partner, but she did not feel that that's what God was asking of her.
Mm. so much that is part of Arlene's story and her life, and I know we just have scratched the surface in a lot of ways. Jeff, how would you, as you've had all of this opportunity to be with Arlene and to share her story, how would you describe her legacy?
Yeah, that is such a great question, Sarah. And I've thought about it. The first thing that comes to mind is her love for Jesus. I once asked her what was her devotion life like, and she said, Jeff, I spend about 2 hours with Jesus in the morning. And she told me about their specific pattern, how she spent those 2 hours. But she said, I will give up a lot of things in my day, but I will not give up my time with Jesus. She would write. Every year, she would sort of write her goals for the year. She would reflect on the past year, write goals for the next year. And later on, what she would typically write is, my goal is to attend the marriage feast of the Lamb. And so she loved Jesus and wanted to spend time with him and wanted to be with him forever. So she affirmed heaven. She affirmed the gospel. She affirmed prayer, and she affirmed her assignment to care for others, particularly through medical missions and then a variety of other ways. Her legacy is in her students as well. So not only her values, but her students, and that's carried on in her students. There's a verse, Sarah, that she particularly treasured later in life, Psalm 71:18. Now that I'm old and gray, do not abandon me, O God. Let me proclaim your power to this new generation, your mighty miracles to all who come after me. So her legacy intentionally was to young people, to the next generation. So the fact that I was chosen to tell her story had a lot to do with the fact that I was working with young people and wanted to tell her story alongside young people. So that's her legacy as well. There's so many people that she's met on the African continent and throughout the churches in this country that carry on her legacy. I think especially of a man named Matthew Gachele, who was a young man that she met. He was an Ethiopian man. She met him in Zambia. He was running from the communist government in Ethiopia, and he wanted to care for his country, but he knew that he needed to go to college. Arlene helped him get to the United States and go to college. And after the government was overthrown in Ethiopia, returned to a democratic government, Matthew returned to Ethiopia and he started a university, New Generation University College in Addis Ababa. There now are at least 4 locations for that university. Matthew is still the president, and 9,000 students at least. I think there may be more now. So there are legacies like that that continue to spin on and on. Her legacy really is in her story, and this is the incredible thing, Sarah, that her story would not be able to be told if she had not written it down. Because later in life, even when she was talking to me, she forgot a lot of things.
Sure.
But I had the journals, and she had the trust, and it took the vulnerability and the courage to hand those journals to me and hand her letters to me and trust me with those so that her story could be preserved. And that story is such a profound legacy. But what it cost her was that when she was desperately tired after teaching all day, spending a shift at the hospital, she came back to her room and she wrote down what happened that day and where she saw God at work in that day. And she did that day after day after day, year after year after year. And her story would have been lost if she had not been faithful during those weary moments to write that story down.
Yeah, that's so good. And that's so captures the heart of this podcast and what we hope to do,
Yes.
is that these stories are not forgotten. But that's such a good perspective of like, there is that cost of the time and the effort to capture, even for ourselves today, what God is doing and what is happening.
Sarah, may I tell you one more story?
Absolutely.
I want to tell you about a man named Michael that I met in the Addis Ababa airport. And I was traveling with Arlene. We had gone to Ethiopia, and then we were going to get on a plane to go on to Zambia. And I was preparing to write the third book, Zambia Home. And there was a tall African American man who had 6 cuts across his forehead, which would identify him as Nuer. And because those are initiation scars. And Arlene went over to him and said, I am Nyabigwa John Kanasser. I'm Arlene, the daughter of John from Nasser. And the man, just his mouth fell open. He said, you're Nyabigwa. And he then gathered, he was with a group of white people. He said, these people are my church. And I'm taking them on a mission trip from the United States to Gambela. And he introduced them to Arlene. And he had never met Arlene, but he said, I've heard about this woman all my life. And when Arlene passed away, I wrote him a letter. I found him on the internet. I hadn't kept his contact information. I just met him there in the airport, but I found him on the internet, and I wrote to him, and he wrote back to me. And this is what he said. It is a heartbreaking news to all Nuer Christians here in the States and around the world to hear of the departure of our dear sister, mother, advocator, ambassador, and disciple of the gospel, Nyabigwa John. She transformed our country and our villages into a Christian community. Through her missionary work, my mother and the rest of the many deacons were able to start their walks with the Lord because of the training Nyabigwa provided. And then the people of Nasser became missionaries to their neighbors. This doesn't happen without the contributions of Nyabigwa John. Her dream for the mission field was real. Without her coming to Nasser, I would not have done what I'm doing today. I'm now working as a missionary among my South Sudanese people in North America. I'm the founder of African Relief Ministries, an organization that helps widows and orphans and equips pastors for ministry. I'm mentioning all of this background because of how Nyabigwa contributed to our community. We will dearly miss her. Her legacy will always remain in our hearts forever.
That captures so much, I think, of her life and like you said, her legacy. So thank you for sharing that. Well, Jeff, thank you so much for capturing Arlene's story and making it available for us to learn and be encouraged by her work in life. Like we've said, that's really the heart of the legacy stories on this podcast, and just, that idea of being able to not put people on a pedestal. We're not doing that with Arlene. She specifically said, don't do that. And we're not doing that, but not letting these stories be forgotten so that we can just learn and be encouraged, and so that God can be glorified.
That ministry, that work is so, so important, Sarah, because those stories happened to a person, but it was not just for that person. That is God at work in their lives and in the world. And part of the point, maybe the big point of that event in that person's life, is so that the story may be told.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And so that the story of the gospel and the story of Jesus can keep going forward. I think of me hearing Arlene's story back in 2006 or 2005, whenever that was was the start of my journey to serve overseas, and all of the people who have been impacted by Arlene. And there was a story being told there, and that was part of that journey. So yeah, thank you so much for your work to share her story through plays and through books and through talking with us on this podcast. We're really grateful.
Such a privilege, Sarah. Thank you.
Well, friends, thanks so much for listening, and we hope that you will join us next time for the Velvet Ashes Legacy Podcast.
Every voice part of the symphony.